Excellent. Thank you. Let me know if it isn't entirely readable. Okay, so today we'll be talking a little bit about Ally, what it does, what problems it tries to address, and then we'll do an actual demo of the service as well. So Ally is a service that focuses on the accessibility of course content, and we've sort of identified a number of different problems in the area of the accessibility of course content. There's a number of problems that the institution is faced with. There's a number of problems that the instructor is faced with. There's a number of problems that the student's faced with. So in terms of the institution, it tends to be very difficult for an institution to get really good insight into how you're doing as an institution in terms of the accessibility of your course content. Other than anecdotal evidence, it's very hard to get really good insight into that, which makes it in turn very hard to identify what you should be focusing on as an institution, who you should be targeting as an institution, where to spend time, and so on and so on. Most of the institutions that we've talked to, they have an alternative media lab where students can put in requests for course materials to be made available to them in an accessible format. That tends to be a workflow where students have to put in the request themselves, and then there tends to be a very manual process of doing their remediation, doing that conversion into an accessible format. For those that have gone through the process, they will know that it's a very, very time-consuming process. It's often a very manual process. So it tends to take, it can take a pretty long time for materials to become available to students, which is both an unsatisfactory as well as an expensive process. Obviously, there's some legal requirements around the accessibility of course content as well, which sometimes ends up with institutions being sued, which is also an expensive and unfortunate process. Next to that, there's a number of problems that the instructors face with, and a lot of that is an awareness problem. There tends to be a very significant lack of awareness of what an instructor is expected to be doing, what they should be doing, and at the same time, there also tends to be a lack of guidance on how to make some of those improvements, how to fix some of those issues. Very often that guidance is actually available as part of the institution's website, for example, but there tends to be a lack of guidance, especially within the context of the systems in which instructors are already doing their work. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, but the approach that we're taking with Ally is very much envisioned as something that can be integrated into several platforms that people are already using, rather than have it be something completely separate, something on the side. Because we believe that the accessibility features that we bring should be brought into the context of where people are already doing their work, rather than having it be something completely separate that they have to be aware of. So that's a number of problems that the instructor is faced with, and then obviously there's a number of problems that the student is faced with as well, in that usually they have to put in an explicit request for things to be made available to them in an alternative accessible format. Because of the manual process that's usually involved in that, there can be long delays in actually receiving that, which doesn't really work with the student's course flow, which can be a frustrating experience. It also, because you have to put in an explicit request as a student, it tends to exclude both the students that aren't aware of their workflow, as well as students without recognized disabilities. And we kind of believe that there's a lot of small things that you can do in accessibility that will actually make a difference for everyone. And we definitely don't want that to be excluded from the picture. So that's definitely a problem we want to take into account as well. So that's how Ally got started. These are some of the problems that Ally is trying to help with or trying to solve. And so, as I said, the way in which Ally is envisioned as a service that will integrate into platforms that people are already using, the learning management system is a very obvious starting point. So it's an important player in terms of course content. It contains a lot of course content. It serves a lot of course content. Students regularly use it to get to their course content. Quite a bit of effort has gone into making sure that the learning management system itself is as accessible as possible, and the vendors are doing a lot of work in this area. But in terms of the actual course content, they tend to treat that as a black box, and so this is where Ally is trying to help a little bit in terms of making the user-generated content, helping make that more accessible. So we are working with all of the major vendors in this space. So we've got an alliance partnership with Instructure Canvas. We've got a network partnership with Desire to Learn for their Brightspace platform, and we're in the process of setting up a partnership with Blackboard as well as Moodle Rooms. And so our goal is to provide an integration with all of those major learning management systems, and we'll be tackling some of the other open source ones like Sakai after this initial list. We definitely don't want to be limited to the learning management system. We do want to bring our accessibility features into other platforms that people are using as well, so that we can create a very coherent accessibility experience across the different systems that people are using. To give you one example, we're already working with the California Digital Library to integrate our service into their new open access platform. So that's just one example of how we're sort of trying to integrate into several different types of platforms. But the learning management system is the one we started off with, is a very obvious starting point. It's also the one that we'll be talking about today. Okay, so a little bit more about the actual workflow and what features Ally provides. So in the way in which Ally works is that, so an instructor, and this is specifically for the learning management system integration, but the instructor goes into their course side, they add their course content, and at that point our service will pick up on it. And our service will try to act as a very, it'll almost be a very invisible thing until you actually need it. And that's kind of the experience that we're going for. It's always there if you need it, but it doesn't really get in the way, which we feel is kind of the right way around. So our service will pick up on the course content that was added, and it will check what type of content is this. Is this a PDF? Is it a Word file? Is it a presentation? Is it a video? Is it audio? Is it HTML? Is it something else? And so on. And then it'll run it through two different processes in order to automatically generate alternative accessible formats for the content. First of all, what it'll do is, based on the type of content that it is, it'll run it through an automated accessibility checklist. This checklist will check for common accessibility issues with that specific type of content. So that'll go very high level from for example, is this a scanned document, to very fine-grained checks, for example, contrast checks on the individual character level in a document. So it'll check for a whole range of common accessibility issues. And then there's a second process, which is we've developed a set of machine learning algorithms. And what these algorithms try to do is they try to identify and recognize the semantics that are visually present but aren't necessarily there in the machine readable format. What that means is that we will do things like identify where the headings are, identify what the heading structure is, where the paragraphs are, where the lists are, where the tables are, where the mathematical formulas are, and so on and so on, even though that information isn't necessarily there in a machine readable way. So in a way that, for example, a screen reader could pick it up. So once we've run it through the accessibility checklist as well as the machine learning algorithms, we will use that information to automatically generate a number of alternative accessible formats. If we take an untagged PDF as an example, which is a very common format that you can find in the learning management system. So what we'll do for those is we'll automatically, using the semantic information that we've extracted, we will automatically generate a tagged version of that PDF. So using what we've extracted in the algorithms. And then the next format that we'll generate, and that's kind of our main format, is we'll generate a high quality semantic HTML version of the content. And so we'll automatically convert headings into proper HTML heading tags. We'll automatically convert lists into proper HTML lists. We'll automatically convert tables into proper semantic HTML tables. We will automatically convert mathematical formulas into MathML or LaTeX. And so there's a whole bunch of things that we do in order to generate pretty high quality semantic HTML version of the content. And we've been doing a lot of usability and other types of testing with that HTML version. I've been getting some really good results with that. And then based on the HTML version, we also automatically generate a number of other alternative formats, such as an EPUB version of the content, an audio version of the content, an electronic braille version of the content, and so on and so on. And then we take all of those alternative accessible formats that we've generated and we make them available to the student and the instructor within the learning management system. Usually this process takes between 2 to 60 seconds, depending on the size of the document. And so within roughly a minute at most, the alternative accessible formats will be available to the student and the instructor next to the original. So our approach kind of is that we never replace the original. We always keep the original there, but every time that the original can be accessed, there's a way to get to the alternative accessible formats as well. So that should actually cut down dramatically in terms of the turnaround time required for a student to get to an alternative accessible format. And I'll come back to that during the demo as well. So the next bit, so that's the first bit that it does. There's two more bits. So the second thing that it does is based on the accessibility checklist, based on the output of the machine learning algorithms, there's also a feedback loop back to the instructor where we try to make them aware of the accessibility issues that exist within their content and try to get them to understand how that affects people, and then try to provide guidance on how they can fix some of those issues. That entire workflow is all brought to them within the context of the LMS, so they don't really have to leave the platform in which they're already doing their work. And it aims to, it tries to do a number of things at the same time. So it has a number of short-term benefits that it tries to achieve in terms of if they go in and fix or make improvements to one of their course content items, then that generates a higher quality original, which is immediately beneficial to the student, but is also allows us to generate higher quality alternative accessible version conversions. Our long-term goal with this is to try and generate a change in behavior, so that next time around, because a lot of this is about how instructors use the tools and sort of the small things that they need to pay attention to. So our goal over the long term is to get them to change their behavior next time around when they're preparing some course content. They can make some of those things part of their workflow, so that they don't have to revisit them after the fact. So that's kind of what we're hoping to achieve over the long run. And then there's a third side to it as well, which is based on doing this across everything within your learning management system. There's a feedback loop back to the institution, where we essentially provide an institutional report that provides a baseline to the institution on how they're doing. So it'll tell them things like what content distribution are you dealing with, how accessible is your content with and without the service, how is it evolving over time, what are the most common issues, what are the most common causes, what are the most problematic courses. We could do who are the most problematic instructors, but we haven't gone there yet. We probably won't do that immediately. And so all of that is aimed at providing the institution with some insight on how they're actually doing, some insight on some understanding as to what the biggest issues are, what they could focus on, where they could provide training, where they could potentially license software, and so on and so on. So that's the third part of what Ally is trying to provide. And then we'll move into the demo. I'll check if there's any questions yet. So does anyone have any questions yet before we dive into the demo? Okay, excellent. Yeah, don't hesitate to jump in if you've got any questions. So let's go and do let's close this down, and let's jump into the demo. So the demo I'll be doing today is with the Ally integration into Instructure Canvas. And so let's go in as an instructor first. And so this is all native Instructure Canvas experience. Go into the course site that this user is teaching, and maybe go into the files tool, and you'll start to see. Let's change this. So you'll start to see that we're adding a few things here, but it's as I said, it's a fairly invisible experience until you actually need the features that we're providing. So let's say that this instructor adds a piece of course content. What I'm adding right now is an untagged PDF. And so right now, as I've added this piece of course content, it's now doing the thing in the background where it's running it through the accessibility checklist, it's checking what type of content it is, running it through the machine learning algorithms, generating the alternative accessible formats, and so on and so on. So let's go back out. Let's go in as a student just to show you what it looks like from a student perspective. Okay. So let's go into the same course. Okay, so as a student, you can see, and this is pretty much the native Canvas experience. It's but as I said, every time that the original is accessible, is available to the student or the instructor, we will add a way for them to get to the accessible versions. So that's true here. That's true here as well. So next to the download, there's the accessible versions within the preview. And our service isn't just limited to the files tool or the files or resources area of your course site either. So if you, as an instructor, if you add content to a wiki page or a discussion or an assignment, we will automatically pick up on that as well and do the processing and do the generation of those as well. As a student, if you come across some course content in any of those places, there will be a way of getting to the original, but we will also automatically add a way to get to the accessible version. So as a student, you would almost be unaware of the fact that you're using the integration that we're providing, that you're using Ally. It's just something that appears to be a very integral part of the platform that you're using, and that's kind of the experience that we're deliberately going for as well. So let's go back to the content that we have just added and have a quick look at what the original looks like. So let's look at the original. So the original, as I said, is an untagged PDF. It's very deliberately chosen because it's a pretty complex PDF. It has some encoding issues. It has a pretty advanced heading structure and a somewhat inconsistent heading structure as well. It's pretty long. It has figures. It has tables. It has a lot of math formulas. It has some lists and so on and so on. It's got a 2-column layout. So this is a pretty complex PDF. It's something that would take, if this had to be manually remediated, would actually take a pretty long time to do. And it's a process that we've gone through. And if any of you have gone through the process of through a similar type of process, you'll know how painful it can, how painful and time consuming it can really be. So this is the original. So if we go back to the learning management system, so next to the original, we'll always make the accessible versions available to the student and the instructor. So in this particular case, you can see all of the available versions. So let's have a look at the HTML version first. So this is what we call the semantic HTML version. So you'll see that we've done a few things such as identify what the heading structure is, convert those to proper HTML heading tags, put all of the paragraphs in there. As you scroll through it, you'll see that we've recognized the tables and converted them to semantic HTML tables. You'll see that we've automatically converted all the math formulas to MathML. And then if I go a little bit further, you'll see that it's a pretty long document. There's some more tables. There's some lists at the end as well. So you'll see that we've done a pretty good job at doing that semantic conversion, creating that semantic HTML version. We believe that the semantic angle of it is very important because, for example, if you're using a screen reader, having a proper heading structure within your document makes it a lot easier to navigate through the document, know where you are, and marking everything up semantically just makes it a lot easier to go through those different things. So there's a question from Cindy asking, does this run the accessibility check and retrofit on documents already in the course or only on the current upload? So Ally is, when you enable Ally, it will process all historical content as well, and we can kind of configure how much of that we want to do. I think by default we will process everything from the current semester, so that includes everything that was added before the service was enabled. We can also configure it to just process everything that's in your learning management system. So if you, for example, we're currently doing a pilot with UC Berkeley. They wanted us to go in and actually reprocess or process everything they had in the LMS, which is about 2.5 years worth of data, is about 1 million different content items. And so we did that for them, that because they wanted to see the full report over the 2.5 years. They wanted to see how things were evolving recently, because they've been having lots of course content accessibility initiatives at the institution. So for them, we process the full thing, and by default, it will do that as well. Yeah, so there's a question from Angie as well on how will students have access to an alternative version? Will it be available where the content is located in the course or only in the file section? So both. So every time that a student can get to course content, it doesn't really matter if it's through the files tool or through a wiki page or through anything else. The alternative versions will always be available next to the original. So it's both. So wherever they come across the course content, there'll be a way for them to get to the alternative versions as well. It's definitely not limited to the files or resources section. Cool, perfect. Thanks for those questions. That's awesome. Okay, so that's the, let's go back out. And so that's the HTML version of the content. Oops, there's one more. Oh, cool. So that's the HTML version of the content. And then, as I said, based on that, there's a number of other formats that we generate. So there's the audio version, and we use we've got a collaboration with Acapella there to generate the audio version. There's an EPUB version, an electronic braille version, which you can run through an Embusser. We can have a quick look at the EPUB version, for example. So that can be opened with any standard EPUB reader. Oops. Let's go back to the first page. So you'll see this is very similar. It's all based on the HTML. It has all of the same semantic information present, and so on and so on. And you'll see the so it has all of the same information as the HTML version. Just gives the user a little bit of freedom and choice on which version they want to work with. Looks there's a whole bunch of questions. So there's one question around how much user testing have we done with people with disabilities? So we've done a fair amount. So I don't know if you're familiar with Lucy Greco from UC Berkeley. She's been acting as both an advisor for us as well as a tester for us in terms of the quality and the usability of conversions that we do. One of the things that we're currently trying to set up is we're trying to set up, and so she's been blind since birth, so she has visual disabilities. One of the things we're trying to do right now is set up a panel of testers that we can get together every 1 or 2 months. We're still figuring that out, and the goal would be to get them to that we pick a subset of documents that we've processed, and we run them past this panel. We want to have people with various types of disabilities on that panel, and then those people would go through both the originals as well as our conversions, and it would make a judgment on how much more readable it is, how much more usable it is, how much easier it is for them to navigate through and to actually read. And so that's something that we're trying to set up, and that would give us some really sort of very qualitative assessment of how well we're doing. And then we do have some numbers on how we're doing from a quantitative point of view as well. So there's a number of corpuses that we test with. A lot of those are used in research, in the research community. And I can definitely give some more information on the accuracy that we get there. And then how much bandwidth does this consume? So for the bandwidth question, is this from a user point of view or from a institutional point of view? So the way in which it works is that when you integrate Ally into your learning management system, so from an institutional point of view, so it kind of depends. For something like Instructure Canvas, where the entire learning management system is cloud hosted by them, it doesn't really add to your bandwidth bill. So the way in which it works is when you integrate it, there's the sort of user interface level integration, and there's also an API level integration, which we use to fetch the content that needs to be processed. So that's kind of the main bandwidth that's being consumed by in terms of the LMS itself. So our service has to get a hold of the course content in order to be able to run it through our processes and do the conversions. In terms of storing the results back, we actually have a number of different options there. By default, we will store the alternative accessible formats on our end in something that's called an Amazon S3 bucket, which is similar to what Canvas, for example, uses to store their content. We do have an option to reconfigure that to store what we've generated into a bucket that the institution maintains, and then we're working with some of the vendors on providing us a way to post the results back into the learning management system without it contributing to the site quota. So that's something. So we're planning to offer those three different choices over time. We currently only have the first two choices there, and then in terms of the actual integration, that doesn't really consume a lot of bandwidth. It depends where the user is downloading it from. If it's downloading from our S3 bucket, then there's no bandwidth costs associated for you. If they're downloading from your S3 bucket, then that does have some associated bandwidth costs, but it tends to be really, really minimal. So I hope that answered the question. And then the next question is, how do you validate your checklist and algorithm to do a good job? So that kind of goes back to what I said. We've got a way of doing both quantitative analysis based on some test corpuses that are being used in research, as well as the qualitative testing that we've been doing with Lucy and some other people. And we're hoping to set up the panel very soon to get a more sort of more in-depth, more quantifiable quality assessment as well. In terms of the checklist, our checklists are pretty heavily based on WCAG, as well as a number of other standards. And so we can't check for everything that's in WCAG, but we can test for most of it. Some of it requires manual verification, but I mean that in itself should be a pretty good validation of that checklist. So does the content get sent anywhere to be remediated, or are all the algorithms and changes being performed locally? So the content's being sent over to our service. Our service is also it's cloud hosted, so it's hosted in Amazon Web Services. So the content is sent over there to go through the checklist, go through the algorithm, and then we store the conversion result on our end. We don't store the original content item on our end. And do you sell it as a service outside of the LMS space for mass conversion of PDFs? Yes, that is something that has come up before. It's something that we'd be happy to have a conversation about. So we currently don't have an entirely standalone version that you can just feed it content items, and it'll give you back the generated versions. But it's something that we could set up, and it's something that we'd be happy to have a conversation about. I think other than all of the integrations, having a standalone service for things like a mass conversion makes a lot of sense. So if that's something that would be of interest, we'd definitely be happy to talk about that. And then there's a question about, does it output accessible PDFs or EPUB and HTML? So it tries to do all of those. So for example, when you give it a Word file or a untagged PDF, we will generate a tagged version of the PDF using the output of the algorithm and the semantics that we've identified. And then it will also generate an HTML version. Based on the HTML version, it will generate an EPUB version. So all of those different versions are available for a user, and it's essentially up to the user to decide which version they want to get. There's a number of versions. So the HTML and the tagged PDF version we generate immediately as soon as we've processed it. Things like the audio version, EPUB version, electronic braille version, we only generate those on request. When they're being requested, we can do them pretty quickly. That's partially because some of them, like an electronic braille conversion, there's the way in which you encode math in braille depends on the country that you're from. So we want to make sure that we can tailor it towards the current user. And at the same time, it's not really necessary to pre-generate all of those. And things like the audio conversions can be pretty large files, especially for large content items. So we only generate those when necessary on request. And then there's another question about This is great. What kinds of accessibility problems in content does Ally not identify? Does it ever identify something it can't fix? Yeah, so in terms of, so there's different types of content. So there's the sort of textual based content, things like PDFs, Word, presentations, and so on, which has been a which has been the main focus of what we've done so far. So that's where we focus most of our efforts. In terms of the more multimedia-like things like video and audio and images, we do have, in terms of images, we do have a pretty good accessibility checklist that checks for issues, and that can be anything from, I mean, is there an alternative description available for this image? What's the quality of that alternative description? Is there text available? Is there text within the image? Are there contrast issues in the image? Are there things that might induce a seizure, and so on? And so we get a pretty good checklist. We also do a number of things, such as a reverse image lookup on the internet to see if we can actually come up with a suggestion for a description. And that'll kind of grow over time. There's a lot of research going on in the automated captioning of images. That's not quite far enough yet for us to use it in production, but that is definitely coming along pretty quickly. And then in terms of videos, we currently have very basic checks for videos. So we check if captions are available if closed captions are available next to the video. That's kind of the extent to which we do checks right now. Video is very high up on our roadmap. So there's, and then we're sort of planning to do two different things. We're planning to look at what we can do in an automated way that would be of high enough quality to actually put into production. And the thing that probably comes closest to that is something like the automated YouTube captioning. So we might look into how we can leverage that. What we will probably start off with is just as part of the instructor feedback, which we'll come to in the demo in a bit. As part of the instructor feedback is to actually make some tools available to instructors that would make it easy for them to both caption the video as well as describe the video or parts of the video. And then in terms of the description, we can use our same text-to-speech method to automatically inject that into the video and make it part of the video and make it part of the player. So there's a whole range of things that we're planning to do there. In terms of, does it identify things that it can't fix? Yes, it does. So for example, in a textual document, if it comes across an image that doesn't have a description, for example, and there's only so much we can do to automatically fix that. So there's so we will flag it. We will flag the content item at that point. It will be highlighted in the instructor feedback loop, and then the instructor will be asked to provide alternative descriptions for those images. There's other types of documents. For example, if we recognize a very poorly scanned document. So when we come across a scanned document, we do OCR it automatically. But if we come across a very poorly scanned document or a document that has lots of handwriting inside of it, there's only so much we can do. And at that point, it's more of a matter of flagging it for the instructor to fix rather than us trying to fix it for them, because we can't guarantee the quality on those types of documents. So there's a few examples where we can identify the issue, but we can't automatically fix it. And then there's a few examples like recognizing the heading structure of a document, doing the MathML conversion, where we can both recognize it and actually provide an automated fix for it as well. Even though we provide an automated fix, we will still ask the instructor, as part of the instructor feedback, to maybe, for example, if they haven't properly marked up their headers, to actually go in and do that, because that sort of guarantees that it's a higher quality of output. So I'm kind of rambling now. What's the next question? Can we go back and alternate version after it's been generated? So that's something that we don't do yet, but it's something that's part of our roadmap, is to allow. So the whole thing that we're investigating right now is what's the right level of engagement with an instructor, what's the right balance between getting them to engage versus not pissing them off. And getting them to engage with the version that we generated and getting them to do a number of basic check the output of it, and maybe even allow them to make changes to the output is something that we haven't done a lot of, that we're kind of getting into right now, and we're not entirely sure where exactly that'll land. But because part of what we output is just regular HTML, we could very easily drop it into WYSIWYG editor, for example, and allow them to interact with it. So it's definitely something we're considering, and we're hoping to sort of grow and build out over time. Is it possible to fix an error that happens during conversion? Yeah, that's kind of similar to what I was saying. Is part of the so we will have things like confidence scores on everything, and so the workflow to allow the instructor to jump in and actually make some changes or make some corrections is something that we're hoping to build out over time. So in terms of the audio version, so the audio version is not hooked up to this demo environment. We use, as I said, we use Acapella to generate the audio. I can send you a sample of what that looks like for this for the PDF that I uploaded. It's probably the most natural voice that we found. And if you want, I'll make a note to send it to you after this meeting. And then there's another question around, can the instructor feedback loop be used, or can Ally also scan for the use of the local rich text editor throughout Canvas? Yes, absolutely. So we also have a checklist and essentially the same set of algorithms for HTML-based content. And so for things that have been added as a page or as a discussion, anything that's been created in the WYSIWYG editor, we can run through the same checklist. We don't have a version yet where the alternative versions that we've generated based on that are made available next to the original, but that's something that's coming up very soon. So that's absolutely part of where we're going right now. And then can it check the student uploaded files? It can. So the service has access to those as well. Right now we're only doing the instructor uploaded ones, but if as soon as we have a use case to do the student generated ones as well, then we can just turn that on. It's almost a matter of flipping a switch. Cool. Yeah, this is awesome. These are all really, really good questions. Let me just finish the demo very quickly, and then we can take some more questions if we want. So that's in terms of the accessible versions. They're all available next to original. Let's go back. Let's go back out and let's go in as the instructor again, just to show the instructor feedback loop. So as I said, we're kind of playing with what the right level of engagement is right now. Right now, we're using a pretty hands-off approach where we provide an indication of how accessible the instructor's content is, and then it requires them to sort of interact with it, and then they can work through the process of making it better. As I said, this isn't just limited to the files or resources areas. For example, if you go into one of the wiki pages or wherever content's being referenced, you'll see a very similar experience there. And then when you engage with it, we have this thing that pops out on the right hand side that will allow you to work through some of the changes that can be made. Let me go back to the document that we added. And so this is a very consistent experience. You can kind of just sort of circle through all of the different content items. And so it'll tell you how accessible it is, what the main issues are. It will give you some suggestions as to fixes that you can make to the content. And then if you want to make one of these changes, and if you want to make some of these fixes, you can kind of dive in, and there will be some content to help you work through the process of making some of those changes. And then at the end of it, you can upload the fixed version. There are a number of changes that we're planning to make to this, just to flesh this out a little bit more, make it a little bit easier for the instructor to engage with it, and maybe even do a number of things that we're asking the instructor to do right now to automatically do them for them. But that's all. It's actively being it's actively evolving. So that's going to improve as we go along. And so that's kind of what the instructor feedback loop looks like. So then you upload the fixed version, it does all of its checks again, and then might make some other suggestions for changes. As we're running out of time, I'll move through this pretty quickly. So right now I'll sign in as a institutional administrator, and I'll go into the institutional report, which is currently limited to just the institutional administrators. We are playing with the idea of making a course version of the report available within the course as well, but then we want to make sure that that's as comprehensible and as clear as possible. So we're still doing some design work around that. But this is what the institutional report looks like. So as I said, it tells the institution what content distribution they're dealing with, how accessible it is with and without the service, what the biggest issues are. You can track, you can sort of see how it evolves over time. You can look at it by year or by term or by month. If you look at it by term, we can actually allow you to look forward by a term. So if you have any instructors that are preparing their course for next semester, we will already report those, and you can, as an institution, intervene before the course gets started rather than after the course is already started and there might already be some problems there. This is essentially a ranking of the most problematic courses, and you can dive into all of those. You can dive into individual courses and look at what distribution are they dealing with, what's their accessibility score, what are their main issues. And so this is all aimed at providing the institution with enough insight and ammunition to decide, to understand how things are going, how things are evolving, what to focus on for training, what to focus on for licensing, and so on and so on. So that's kind of what the institutional report looks like. Let me close this down. And then just to kind of quickly finish that off before we jump into more questions. So just to recap, so there's 3 different things that LI does. There's it automatically generates alternative accessible formats based on the machine learning algorithms that we have and the automated checklists. And it makes those available to both students and instructors within the learning management system. There's a instructor feedback loop where we try to guide the instructor on what the biggest, get them to understand what the accessibility issues with their course content are, and how they can fix those issues and hopefully alter behavior over time. And then there's the institutional report or institutional feedback loop where we try to provide enough insight and ammunition to the institution on how they can further improve things at their institution. So the way in which we tend to think about the accessibility of course content is almost as a spectrum or a continuum, and as an institution, you're at a particular point on that continuum, which is usually pretty far down based on what we've seen so far. And then the way in which LI tries to help you move up on that spectrum is by first of all, by doing the alternative accessible formats, which automatically starts to close some of that gap and automatically moves you up on that continuum, on the spectrum. And then in order to sort of close down part or most of the remaining gap, that's where you need to engage instructors. That's where instructors need to contribute to that as well, and that's how the instructor feedback loop comes in. And by giving them guidance, as well as pointing out issues within the context of where they already are, that's kind of how we want to close another part of that gap and make things even better. And then the institutional report is there to sort of oversee that entire process, give you a sense of where you currently are on the spectrum, give you a chance to identify opportunities to sort of further close the remaining gap that remains after the alternative accessible formats and the instructor feedback. So that's kind of how we're thinking about how LI can be a help in moving your institution up significantly on that spectrum of accessibility, because it's definitely not a black and white problem. So that's mostly it. If you're interested, we are offering free of charge 3-month pilots. So if you're interested as an institution, definitely reach out to me after this webinar. Be happy to set something up. We can either do at this point, we can either do the sort of summer term or the fall term, but definitely interested to talk about that. If you are interested in doing a pilot, we allow you to kind of to define whether or not you want to roll any of these features out to either your entire institution or a subset of courses that you pick. So the report could be rolled out, could be run on just a subset of courses or the entire institution. The alternative versions could be on the entire LMS or just a subset of courses, and the same is true for the instructor feedback. And we've got institutions going in both directions, so we're open to both. And then, as I said, we're in the process of putting together that LI evaluation panel, which would probably meet every 2 months and go through some of the content that we've identified. If you or anyone you know would be interested in joining that panel, definitely reach out to me as well, and love to talk about that as well. Okay, I think that's everything I had. Let's see if there's any additional questions. Yeah. So what's your pricing model? So we're using a model that's very similar to the to how the learning management system itself is priced. So it's a per FTE per year model. Our list price right now is $2 per FTE per year. But for large institutions, we're definitely happy to talk about that. So there's another question around who are the existing clients. So we're still pretty small at this point. I would say that we're just getting started rolling it out to a larger number of institutions. So we've got places like UC Berkeley that are currently using it. We've got places like University of California Office of the President that are piloting the service. We've got a whole bunch of pilots lined up, about 10 or 12 of them, that will be starting in the next 2 weeks. And then we're lining up a number of additional clients for the summer term. So most of those are in the US. There's one UK institution as well, but there's about if you add them all up, it'll probably be around 20 by summer. Yes, absolutely. So there's a question on, do you run usability tests on the interface used by students and instructors? Let me get to the Canadian one after that. So we do quite a bit of usability testing. We've got 2 UX designers and UX researchers on our team that are partially tasked with doing those usability tests. So we've done a fair amount of usability testing. A lot of that has been at UC Berkeley. We, as part of the sort of piloting, as part of the piloting with an institution, there would be an opportunity to participate in that as well, and maybe get one of our UX designers to engage people at your institution in those tests, either face-to-face or remotely, depending on where exactly you are. But yeah, we try to pay a lot of attention to the sort of usability and user experience side of things, and we've done a lot of usability testing already, and we're planning to increase that even more going forward. And then any Canadian institutions. So we don't have any Canadian institutions lined up as pilot institutions. Right now, there's a few that we're talking to, but nothing concrete yet. But we'd be very interested in having some. So there's another question. Is it possible for individual institutions to identify which standards they'd like to be used in your scans? We are adopting WCAG 20AA. Yeah, so WCAG 20AA has been our basis for our checklist, and we've added some additional things to that based on the Matterhorn and other standards. So it's very well represented within our checklist. One thing you'll have noticed in our institutional report is the fact that we can't actually call it compliance within the institutional report, because calling it compliance would make the institution liable, because at that point they would know that they're not compliant, and it would be a lawsuit risk. So that's why we call it an accessibility score. That's partially to go around. That's fine from a legal point of view. The accessibility score is an indication of your compliance, but doesn't have a direct relationship with, or isn't the same as compliance. And then there's a few things within WCAG 20 AA as well as AAA that can't be automatically checked. That do require some manual engagement and some manual checking. So we can't do all of the checks. We do check for most of them. The accessibility score is a very strong indication of how compliant you are, but it can't be called compliant itself. We don't have any configuration on which standard to test for. We try to combine as much as possible from different standards, but and put them all make them all part of the checklist, because that's probably the safest thing to do. But WCAG AA has been the kind of basis for the checklist. And then there's a question on, does the third-party audio file conversion have an additional cost? No, it doesn't. So that's so the cost that's associated to generating the audio files is included as part of the cost of the service. So there's no additional cost for that. The same is true for things like OCRing all of the content that we come across. That's all because we work with an external service there as well, and that's all part of the service cost. So that's all included in the price. And then, will the recording of this webinar be available? If so, how can we get access? Yes, it will be available. This time I actually remembered to press the record button when we got started. So I will upload the recording. I will send them to everyone that attended this webinar in an email, and I will also make it available on our website. And then there's a question on, what's your support of foreign languages, PDFs in a foreign language, for example. So it's kind of mixed right now. So there's not that much that we do that's completely English specific. There's a few things there. So we expect the algorithms, we take a very visual approach to our algorithms. And so we expect those algorithms to work well with most of the sort of, how should we call them, like Roman languages or Latin languages, I guess is what we would call them. So they would work well for Western European, for English, and so on. In terms of things like right to left or things like Chinese or something like that, that would work. That wouldn't work as well because they, for example, in the Chinese they don't have spaces between words, as far as I understand. So for those things, that's going to have to be something that we add over time. But right now, that wouldn't work super well. In terms of the things like OCRing and audio conversions and so on, that would actually work fairly well. So the components that we use there are fully internationalized and do support those other reading directions or other writing directions, as well as other character sets. So for those, it would work well. But the sort of semantic identification might not be perfect for those at the moment. Awesome. Thank you for all of these questions. This has been one of the most engaging webinars I've ever got to do. It's really good. Okay. So are there any final questions? We've got 2 minutes left on the clock. Yep. So I'll make the recording available to everyone that attended, and I'll put it on the website as well. And then, yeah, thanks again for attending this webinar. If you have any interest in joining as a pilot institution or joining the evaluation panel, definitely reach out to me. Reach out to me after this webinar, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it. You can get a hold of me at info@ally.ac, or you can use my Nicholas@Frontier address as well, which is what I send the webinar reminder out with. Okay, cool, perfect. Well, thanks again for attending, and I hope to speak soon with all of you. Enjoy the rest of your day.